The cost of an Oculus CV1 is $599 US. However, the cost of living a dream is priceless. As such, I used my college saving fund to purchase a Rift. And ignoring the multitude of AAA VR titles, I booted up PonyVRville. And unfortunately, what was meant to be a whimsical time turned into a traumatic nightmare. A nightmare I care not recount. In fact, it was so traumatic I went to go see a therapist. Unfortunately, after the purchase of an Oculus Rift, the only therapist I could afford was Dirty Joe down the street. In my first session with Dirty Joe, he recommended, and I quote, "Just let it out." When I began to recount my experience, Dirty Joe stopped me and said, and I quote, "Stop, Dirty Joe's time is a precious commodity." And that's why we're all here today, as I decided the internet was the least toxic place to share. So buckle up, folks, because we're about to go for one hell of a ride. My time in Ponyville began in a nondescript pink room. A screen on the wall gave me the basics of how to become a colorful magic horse. I learned a number of things about equine biology. For example, some horses are capable of shooting lasers. Others are capable of instantaneous movement in space. And some very special horses are capable of controlling the fabric of time itself. As it turns out, the horse I was playing as had the capability to do all of these things. Once I had the basics of being quadruped down, I set out into the town. I was afforded with an amazing view of Equestria's most notable village. I quickly used my horse powers to become a bird to get a better view. And that's when I saw Pinkamena Diane Pie hopping my way. As is customary, I began to discharge my energy-based weapon at her. I quickly found that she was invulnerable to such attacks, and I began to enjoy my dream at its fullest. After exploring the town, I attempted to roleplay as an Islamic extremist and take down a tower with my body. It was at this point that I saw my personal favorite horse. With a tip from my fedora and a blast from my laser, I vowed I would protect her from harm. This is when I discovered that my horse had access to an armory capable of taking down a small island dictatorship. With complete and uncompromised access to an infinite amount of lasers, firebombs, and high explosives, I could finally live out my second fantasy, to become a mentally unstable South African mercenary. Effectively living two dreams at once, I set out again. As I accompanied it, or as Constable Monroe would have said, stalked Fluttershy home, I soon found myself at her cottage. After a brief social experiment with Angel Bunny involving a bomb, I entered the cottage proper. Upon illegally entering the premises, I found the first of many Easter eggs. It was the lovable companion cube from the cult classic Portal series. At this point, I heard the familiar sound of a feminine scream and police sirens. I took this as my cue to leave. I also quickly decided that it was my God-given right to take the cube with me. Many months later in a courtroom, I would find that theft is not protected under the Charter of Freedoms and Rights. However, that's a story for another time. As I fled, I began to pretend that I was the US war machine and that the companion cube was an oil-rich Middle Eastern country. After dispensing a sufficient amount of freedom, I discovered a new ability my horse had. As it turns out, my horse can instantiate a clone of Pinkamena Diane Pie through sheer force of will. But who giveth life can also taketh life. High on my ability to control the very essence of life and death, I decided that I needed more. Much more. Within seconds, much like a man with a hot pink eye patch, all I could see was pink. This is when I began to live out my third fantasy of being a high-altitude strategic bomber. For every bomb I dropped, 100 pies fell. I was like a crazed and delusional pastry chef who had recently escaped a mental institution. The ecstasy of battle had soon overwhelmed me. This was my D-Day, this was my Vimy Ridge, this was my Desert Storm. Unfortunately, it would also be my Waterloo. As more and more pink equines turned to dust around me, I found I was unable to see the collateral damage that I had truly caused. My bloody onslaught had caused detrimental and irreversible trauma on the residents of Ponyville. I have assembled a short montage that I believe will help give a face to the unseen casualties of my campaign. That piece was made in the loving memory of all those who lost their lives during my time in Ponyville. It was in part created by my good friend, Henry, who is currently serving a life sentence in a Florida prison for first-degree murder. Henry had this to say: "I'm sorry, Jennifer, I truly am, but Rick had it coming." But that's enough of Henry. Back to my far more serious problems. Hours into my killing spree, I began to move across the bridge, in search for a better vantage point for which to shoot my lasers. It was there that I encountered the familiar face of Milady. As I began to tip my trilby, I saw the dead look in her eyes. Oh no, I thought. What have I done? I had only brought the very human concept of warfare to Ponyville, and while I don't doubt that horses are a violent species themselves, they don't have opposable thumbs. At this point, I decided that only my death could save Ponyville. I decided that jumping from a low bridge into shallow water was the best way to go about this. For old time's sake, I fired my weapon one more time, inadvertently killing an innocent bystander. As I looked into the murky shallows below me, I began to contemplate the life choices that brought me to this point. I quickly narrowed it down to two possible events. It was either the day I was conceived, or the day I met an illegal Mexican immigrant by the name of Ricardo in an abandoned Houston parking lot. As I jumped into the water, my last thoughts were with Ricardo in his leopard print suit.
What you say? That you only meant well, 'cause you did. What you say? That it's all for the best.
Thank you for listening, viewer. With this official therapy session done, I think I can finally convince my attorney that I shouldn't be pleading insanity. If you too want to experience PonyVRville, you can mail an arm and a leg to either Valve or Facebook. Then follow the link in the description to download the app itself.